It's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt Leader within. Hey, this week I want to take a look at the iPhone and how this incredible device has revolutionized the way that you and I and the world communicates, but to also point out a fatal flaw that literally plagued this device for many, many years. I want to talk about being damaged, but not beyond repair. Now, if you don't know the story of the iPhone, let me give you a little bit of a backstory. The very first iPhone was introduced to the world January 2007 at the Macworld Convention in San Francisco. Now, it was a mock-up. It wasn't even a live phone. Steve Jobs took a big gamble. He told the audience that Apple was going to be releasing 3 devices in 2027, a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary brand new mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. And then he announced that these 3 objects were all going to be merged into one phone. And he then presented this mock-up of the iPhone to the world. Now, the very first iPhone literally went on sale about 6 months later, June 29, 2007. They offered a 4 gigabyte model, get that, 4 gigabytes for $499 and an 8 gigabyte model for $599. Now, both phones featured a 3.5-inch display, a 2 megapixel camera, visual voicemail, and Safari web browsing. Around 270,000 units sold in the first 30 hours. Demand was so high that AT&T reported their servers were being taxed as 146,000 people tried to activate their iPhones the very first weekend. Fast forward 74 days later, Apple was at 1 million customers worldwide. Consumers loved this idea of a phone, a widescreen iPod, and an internet browser all in one with a functional touchscreen. By the end of 2007, 1.4 million iPhones had been sold. Now, while the iPhone was and still is a revolutionary device, one problem experienced by many users early on and still to some extent today is screen breakage. The creators of the iPhone chose to prioritize aesthetics and display over the ruggedness of the glass. And even though we've had improvements in material technology, breakage can still be a problem. Now, the iPhone 12 introduced the ceramic shield to help improve durability, and they've made more and better strides since then. But the reliance on edge-to-edge glass in the iPhone and even in some of the other phone manufacturers makes them vulnerable to impact. Now, the front glass in most of the smartphones today often extends to the very edge of the phone, or it curves slightly. And that often makes glass the first point of contact when the phone is dropped. Now, glass is brittle, and while it's hard to scratch, it is susceptible to shattering on impact. And you also know if you put an iPhone in a tight pocket or you put it in a bag and set some things down on it, even pressure can cause the phone to crack, even without it being dropped. Now, while an iPhone may continue to function with a cracked screen, that cracked screen, if left unrepaired, can go on to create further damage. Dirt, debris, and moisture can get into the cracks, can actually damage the LED panel itself. A cracked screen can also develop what are called dead zones, where the finger no longer responds to the touch screen because of the damage. And those cracks over time can grow, and that can increase the area of damage and reduce the screen's functional and visibility. Now, there is some good news, well, sort of good news, and ask my daughter my baby daughter Kira, who's broken more than one phone in her life. If a screen is cracked, it may be damaged, but it's not beyond repair. Now, a screen repair can be costly, but if you've got a case, fantastic. That is one of the best ways to protect the investment in a phone. And there are many great cases that are out there today. I use the OtterBox, and I love the OtterBox, and I've dropped many a phone over the years, but thankfully, because of my OtterBox, so far, my screens have remained intact. Now, whatever you use, again, you got to be careful with the iPhone, because once it's cracked, it's a problem. Now, if you've ever been there, done that, and I promise you, my daughter understands this because she's had it happen more than once. You know that sick feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach as this phone you paid good money for slips from your grip, falls from a table, and it strikes the ground. Well, guess what? You're sweating it as you pick it up, you turn it over, and what do you see? You think you're watching a spiderweb movie. Why? Because that screen has cracked and sometimes it's shattered, and that glass has spiderwebbed all over the phone. You know, for many people, it's a moment of anger. For others, it's a moment of embarrassment. But the immediate thought for everybody else is, oh no, this phone is ruined. But one of the good things about the iPhone, it's a pretty durable phone. And even with a cracked screen, that iPhone still usually works. Most of the time, you can still receive calls, you can still send texts, you can still browse the web. But every time you pick it up and you look at that device, it reminds you of that moment when you were careless. And now you're dreading that inevitable bill when you know you've got to take that phone in to get it repaired. Now, again, remember, if the screen is cracked, the iPhone may be damaged, but that doesn't mean it's not beyond repair. Now, let me pivot from the iPhone and let me share a similar damage but not repair moment that I experienced with one of my pride and joys, which was my Camaros growing up when my kids were younger. One of the gentlemen that worked for me, Uncle Jim, as my kids called him, he and I were getting ready to travel to a conference in Missouri. We were heading up scenic Highway 7 early in the morning. And if you've ever had an opportunity to drive scenic Highway 7, it's one of the most beautiful drives in Arkansas, especially with the changing of the colors in the fall. Now, the sun was beginning to peek through the tree-lined highway as Jim and I rounded a curve. It's 55 miles an hour. It's in the middle of nowhere, and we're driving, just having a great time. And all of a sudden, we look up, and right there in the middle of the road, a trio of deer, a buck, and two females. Well, the deer saw us coming, and the buck and one female went to the right. The other female ran to the left. And my thought was, I'll split the difference. I'll go down the middle. Maybe at that point, the deer will have a chance to get away, and I can get away unscathed. So as I swerved to the middle of the road and began to put on my brakes, all of a sudden, the female who went left decided she wanted to join her companions and turned and ran the other way. Well, again, I was driving my pride and joy. At that point in time, it was a brown Camaro. And as I was applying the brakes, the nose of that vehicle began to lower as I was trying to quickly slow that car as much as possible. The deer jumped in an effort to avoid my car, but as she did, we had contact and my bumper clipped her feet as she jumped. Well, that caused the doe to land on the hood of my car, and she slid up and over the windshield, down the back of the car, landed on her feet, ran into the woods, and disappeared with the other two deer. So Jim and I got out of the car after I got it stopped to assess what had happened. The doe's foot, as we made impact, it broke a headlight. When she landed on the hood of my car, yes, it folded it and bent it. It was damaged. And she also damaged the passenger side fender panel. But thankfully, the car was drivable because we were in the middle of nowhere. There was no cell service. There was not a town for miles. So we did the only thing we could do. We drove on to Missouri. We attended the conference and we traveled home the next day. Well, when I got home, I went to see my mechanic, Alex, and I shared the story about what happened. And Alex looked at me and he smiled and he reached over and he patted my little car. He said, John, she's damaged, but she's fixable. So we ordered the parts and the work was done. And about a week later, I was driving my pride and joy once again. My Camaro had been damaged by a deer, but I learned quickly with a little bit of time and a little bit of money, it was not beyond repair. And I want to take that thought, damaged but not beyond repair, and I want to pivot and I want to apply that to our lives. How often do you and I feel like our lives have been shattered or broken? We make a mistake, we experience a breakup, we have a setback in our career, or we have a failure in our lives. And when that happens, what do? Our thoughts oftentimes continually replay that episode over and over, and we find ourselves stuck there, focusing on the crack or the dent in our lives. And the more we focus on it, the more we amplify those feelings of frustration, of anger, of guilt, or embarrassment. Now, when an iPhone breaks, even if it's only a cracked screen, How often are we tempted simply to go get a new phone? Getting that now old phone fixed seems like a waste of time and money. After all, the repair process is slow, it's expensive, and it's inconvenient. Why not just go to the store, get a new one, and start over? And rather than waiting days to get your phone back, I'm in and out in less than an hour. Or if I wreck my car, how often do thoughts lead to, well, let's just go visit a dealership or let's go scroll Carvana or Car Gurus? Instead of paying all that money to get what is now an old car repaired and waiting days or weeks for that car to come back, why don't we just put that money towards a new one and drive off the lot and be done with what was broken and what was damaged? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. When things don't go as planned in our lives, when we experience a setback, when we make a mistake or we find ourselves failing, what are we tempted to do? Oftentimes, we're tempted just to move on to something new rather than taking the time to fix what's broken so what was broken can work like new again. Remember, whatever it is you've been through, your life may be damaged, but it is not beyond repair. Damage isn't always a total loss. Ask my daughter Kira with a phone. Ask me about that with my car. Damage is usually only an indication that something needs to either be rebuilt or repaired. It simply requires that we shift our mindset from it's broken, let's throw it away, to it's not that bad, let's get it fixed. But to do so takes time, takes patience, and sometimes some specialized tools. But at the end of the day, we come out on the other side fully and completely restored. Now, what you use to put things back together matters. That's the same whether you're repairing a physical object like a phone or a car, or you're repairing your life. The tool you choose in that moment is going to define the strength, the flexibility, the visibility, and the permanence of the repair. Now, the same thing applies to how you and I handle life setbacks, mistakes, and failures, and relationship repairs. Let me give you an example. Sometimes we take what I call a super glue approach to dealing with the challenges of life. Now, it's fast acting, it's immediate, but super glue isn't always permanent. That doesn't take a lot to do the job, and it works really, really quickly. But I'm here to tell you, super glue's bond is brittle, and that bond often breaks under stress. So if you're using a super glue approach to fix a problem, it may not hold under stress, and it may require that you've got to go back with a more permanent long-term solution later. So the super glue approach to repairing life's challenges, that often happens when you and I choose a quick, superficial solution to either avoid emotional discomfort in the moment or simply to mask over a problem that we don't want to fix. Let me give you an example. It's easy to apologize for something we've done to offend someone else. That's the super glue approach. Changing our behavior so we don't do it again, that takes a little more. And rather than fix it the right way, we look for a way to make the problem go away without really fixing it. Now, other times we may take what I call a wood glue approach to problem resolution. Now, wood glue is stronger than the surrounding material, the wood that it's going to bond. It penetrates deeply into the crevices and into the imperfections of the wood, but wood glue takes time to cure. Now, the quality of a repair, if you're using wood glue, is only as good as the preparation and the honesty that you've taken in addressing the root cause of the break. It also requires patience because wood glue takes time to cure and to cure properly. So the wood glue approach to problem resolution is when we try to repair the challenges of life in addressing the root causes of the issue, rather than simply trying to use a filler to mask the problem or super glue for a quick, easy fix that doesn't really fix the problem. But it requires that we be honest about what happened and why, and that we take the time to rebuild trust over time so that bond cures. Because if we take the time to do it right, the end result of that relationship, it's going to be better and stronger than before. Sometimes we need to take an epoxy approach to fixing our problems. This is a two-part process, but results in a permanent bond. And this approach is about lasting transformation. If we think about epoxy, it's welding two items together. And that weld is a deep foundational change that forges a new and strong relationship between two or more people. The epoxy represents the filling that we're going to use in the potential weak spots in the relationship that might compromise the transformation. But once that epoxy has come together and we've used both elements in the process, and that has a chance to cure, all of a sudden we create long-term and structural integrity to the relationships. Why? Because we've addressed the root cause and we've come up with something incredible. Now, other times it's just a minor issue in life, and when it is, we can use a Band-Aid approach to repair that. Band-Aids are quick, they're adaptable, they're flexible, but they're messy and they're visible. But sometimes when we're dealing with a Band-Aid, flexibility is necessary for survival. And remember, tape doesn't last forever. Got to change those Band-Aids every day. But a Band-Aid gives you freedom of movement, not a permanent fix. It gives some comfort, but it's best when dealing with a temporary issue. So we use the Band-Aid approach when we're dealing with either a distraction or we need a temporary coping mechanism while we're going through a crisis. What are we doing? We're reducing the immediate tension that's caused by a minor wound, but it lets us keep moving forward and function. A Band-Aid approach provides time for a relationship to mend itself and the issues around it to be resolved. Now, there's also the needle and thread approach to dealing with crisis in our lives, and that's used when repairs in our lives need careful, precise, and manual reconstruction. Because sewing things together requires care, it requires attention, it requires effort. And the visible stitches serve as a visual reminder of the time and the effort we took to make things new. This approach demonstrates intentional, careful effort. So the needle and thread approach is about mending relationships through personal communication and rebuilding self-esteem and trust and cooperation one stitch at a time. Now, scissors may represent the destructive nature of conflict, but the needle and thread represents a deliberate repairing process that binds two people together. But it requires the two people be willing to mend. So how do these approaches play out in real life? Well, if you're in a crisis, you might need a Band-Aid or super glue just to stay together. But on the other hand, if you're looking to build a new life, you might need wood glue because that wood glue is going to create deeper, lasting bonds in that relationship. But if you're having to heal deep damage, deep wounds, or deep hurt, maybe you're going to take the epoxy approach because that's going to create permanent, resilient repairs in your life and the life of someone else. Now, there's one last repair I want to touch on, and it has its origins in ancient Japan. It's an approach to fixing what's damaged, but doing so in a way that turns brokenness into strength. I want to talk about the art of kintsugi. Now, kintsugi is the art of repairing broken pottery. And usually it's a ceramic like a teapot or a teacup. You utilize a lacquer that is mixed with powdered gold or silver or platinum. And rather than trying to hide the damage, the lacquer with the gold, the silver, and the platinum highlights the cracks. And it treats the repair as part of the object's history and part of its beauty. So during a tea ceremony in Japan that has its origins in 16th century Japan, utilizing the elements that we talked about in kintsugi, the participants engage in a process called wabi-sabi. Now, wabi-sabi is an appreciation and a celebration of that which was once broken but has now been repaired and is usable once again. It's a reminder to the participants in the tea ceremony that you and I can find value in imperfection and that which is incomplete. Now, when our relationships have been damaged, you and I, we have two choices. We can either walk away and leave that relationship broken, or we can choose to repair the emotional cracks in our relationship and do so with compassion and with care. And rather than pursuing a perfect relationship, which is a myth, we choose to accept the fact that our partner has flaws. And guess what? So do we. So Wabi Sabi reminds us that we've got to give up on the desire to try to fix the other person in the relationship. We have to choose and intentionally choose to come together as two imperfect people and simply celebrate the present moment and what we bring to it. Wabi Sabi is about focusing on the positives in every single relationship rather than focusing on what's lacking. So I want you to think about this. You and I, we all have scars in our relationships because at times, you and me, we've all been damaged at some point. So our scars from past conflicts that we've overcome, like silver or gold or platinum lacquer, show that you and I have found a way to fix what was broken and do so in a way that adds value to who we are. Now, we may have been broken, but we were not beyond repair. And the lessons that you and I have learned as we've gone through challenge and we've gone through conflict and we've overcome those things have made us even more valuable. And that means even if the scars of the past are still visible to ourselves and to others. And like the repaired teapot or teacup, we come out of these challenges and conflicts of life more beautiful, more valuable than the original, because our scars, they tell a story. They tell a story of healing, of redemption, of restoration, and of overcoming. And like the screen of an iPhone, sometimes our lives have been cracked by conflict. You and I, we may have been damaged, but I promise you, we are not beyond repair. So Wabi Sabi reminds us of one thing. Our cracks are not our failures. Our experience, our struggles, the conflicts that we've overcome, and the process of kintsugi in our lives allows us to take those things and we have been restored with golden seams that declare to the world that we were once broken, we were once damaged, but we were not beyond repair. And as a result of that, has come of that, we have been transformed. We are unique. We are one of a kind. We are a masterpiece. Our scars make us more valuable than before because we are a continual work in progress. So don't hide your cracks, embrace them. Do the work to repair what was broken and allow your scars to tell a story of healing, redemption, restoration, and overcoming. That's a story others around you may need to see and they may need to hear so they themselves can understand that they may be damaged, but they too are not beyond repair. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.